The CBS Evening News with Charles Curalt, substituting for Walter Cronkite, and Ike Pappas in Chicago, Morley Safer in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, Peter Kalischer in Prague, Richard Threlkeld in Los Angeles, Terry Drinkwater in Delano, California, and Bruce Morton in New York.
Good evening. Hubert Humphrey set out today to pick up the pieces. The Democratic Party was fractured as rarely before, and its presidential candidate knew his first job was to try to put it back together again. He turned to that job in the post-convention gloom of Chicago with his characteristic energy.
You can't win unless you believe you can. And you've had plenty of people telling you that you couldn't win, and some of them are right in this room. And I don't blame some of our friends that write columns that speak to us over radio and television when they say we can't win. Because I'm afraid too many of us have told them that we couldn't win. Now, if you've just got to get your name in the paper and you have to get yourself on television, may I suggest you make another speech? We can win. That's news too, you know. But this I want to say, that every goal that we have, every objective that we seek to fulfill can only be fulfilled if we carry out our responsibilities and unite this party so that we can win this election. I want to say to you what I've said to others. For those that cry out for peace, for those that want a better America, for those that cry out for more adequate representation of all of the people of America in the processes of our democracy, for those that want to clean up our slums, for those that want to help the poor, for those that want to help the maimed and the sick, I ask you very candidly, do you think you're going to get any of that done? Any of it? If you turn the reins of government over to Mr. Nixon and Strom Thurmond and the Republican Party, just ask yourself that question. I don't think you are. I think your only hope, and our only hope, is if we stand together in common cause, putting aside our little petty differences, our little grievances, putting aside what little things have happened to us along the way, forgetting them, forgiving, and go on out and win an election, and win it honorably.
But unity seems beyond Humphrey's grasp for the moment. Senator Eugene McCarthy is staying stubbornly outside the fold. Senator McCarthy said today he plans to campaign for senators whose ideas on the Vietnam War are the same as his, including some Republicans if they ask for it, but he has no plans to support any presidential candidate.
Shell's hidden camera rolls again. Cindo Rodriguez doesn't know it, but he's talking to comedian Tom O'Malley, who's going to challenge his choice of Super Shell.
How long have you been buying it? Super Shell? Super Shell.
All the time.
What's platform made?
I don't know what platform made.
Well, then why do you buy it? You don't even know what's in it.
Well,
doesn't that sound funny to you?
It may sound funny to me, but it still works.
You know more about it than me. Look at what I'm wearing.
Well, I don't care. I know what my car works on.
Super Shell.
That's right.
You get bad or good mileage?
I got good mileage.
Would you tell millions of people on television that?
I would.
We're on television.
Oh, you
This is a microphone. Come over here. Those are two cameras over there. But you really fought for the product, huh?
Well, I do, because I like it.
Thank you, Cindo Rodriguez. For good mileage, get Super Shell. It goes a long way.
The convention is over to the relief of many Democrats, but the recriminations linger on. One of the more bizarre incidents occurred in the early hours of this morning when Chicago police, provoked, they said, by a rain of debris on their heads, raided a hotel suite used by McCarthy supporters. Senator McCarthy is forming a committee of Chicago lawyers to investigate. For the story, here's CBS News correspondent Ike Pappas.
The scene was McCarthy headquarters on the 15th floor of the Conrad Hilton Hotel. The time, about 5:30 in the morning. Police claim a group of unruly McCarthy workers threw ashtrays, beer cans, and other objects at National Guardsmen and police forces on the street below. A contingent of guardsmen, police, and hotel security men charged up to the headquarters to put a stop to it. But the police story differs from the way the McCarthy people saw the incident.
In room 1511, when someone knocked at the door, we thought it was one of the people, possibly, on our staff. I opened opened the door at that time. The police demanded that we leave our room at that time. And I asked for what reason, and they would not give a reason.
And if you asked on what grounds, they said coffee grounds.
They said what?
They said coffee grounds.
Go on.
We saw some of the people being beaten as we were going down the elevator. There were people that were bleeding all over. Yes, they were hitting and kicking. 3 police officers were working over one of the fellows and kicking him and beating him with a nightstick.
I don't know whether anything was thrown from any window in my headquarters. I don't know whether anything was dropped from any window in my headquarters. I don't know whether things were dropped from any windows in the hotel.
Do you think some of your supporters are in any danger here?
Well, I don't know how much danger they are. There's some question of whether you're as safe in Chicago wearing a McCarthy button as you are when you don't wear one.
As those who wore McCarthy buttons prepared to leave Chicago, it was apparent that many of them won't be putting on Humphrey buttons. Allard Lowenstein of New York, a leader of a dissident Democratic coalition, was one of those.
The only political decision that we took last night, which has been, I think, inherent in our activity throughout the time of the existence of the coalition, is that we will work within the Democratic Party. I would predict, although I can't speak for what will happen in 2 weeks, but I would predict with, I think, no dissent from any of our executive committee, that we will not be taking a position as an organization on the presidential election. There certainly was no sentiment to do that last night, and I don't expect that sentiment is likely to build up in that direction if it is not now present. I, for one, and I speak now for myself, cannot take seriously any suggestion by Vice President Humphrey or by anybody supporting him that I should waste 30 seconds of my time considering whether I might in any circumstance support his candidacy, as long as I know that behavior of the kind that occurred in this hotel while he was in this hotel is not of sufficient consequence to him to require him, as the candidate for president of my party, to do more than say that he's in favor of law and order. And so for myself, I have no further interest in discussing what ultimately my position would be on the presidency until steps are taken to address the horror that was inflicted on American citizens in this hotel by the police of this city.
One Democrat who did remain loyal to Hubert Humphrey was Lawrence O'Brien, a former Kennedy strategist. He was rewarded today by being named both chairman of the Democratic National Committee and manager of the Humphrey campaign. Richard Nixon, smiling and relaxed, returned to New York today after an 8-day working vacation in Florida and the Bahamas. He insisted that his decision to open his campaign in Chicago next Wednesday had nothing to do with the troubles the Democrats had there during their convention. Bruce Morton reports.
At Miami Airport this morning, Richard Nixon was carefully non-committal about the Democratic convention, insisting it's only because Illinois is a key state that his own campaign is resuming in Chicago next Wednesday.
Well, it's a critical state. No, a critical state. It's not being started there because of the fact that the Democratic convention is there, but we're hitting Chicago, Illinois, California, Texas, and Pennsylvania, four representative states all over the country, east, west, north, and south. We're trying to cover in the first week, the 4 sections of the country: the Midwest, the Far West, the South and Southwest, and the East. That's why we made this selection.
Nixon's aides insist Chicago was picked before the Democratic debacle. But law and order will be a major theme of Nixon's speeches this coming week, and some of his staff members, at least, agree that a lawful, orderly Chicago appearance would be a psychological boost in showing Nixon off as the kind of candidate who can produce unity, not street brawls. Bruce Morton, CBS News, New York.
Hubert Humphrey has failed to win the endorsement of Radio Hanoi. In a broadcast directed to U.S. forces, the North Vietnamese radio said about Humphrey, "People may demonstrate against him, GIs may keep on dying, but what does he care with all the big money the presidency would give him?" Radio Hanoi on Hubert Humphrey. Enemy troops in Vietnam tried and failed to launch an attack against Da Nang last weekend. Yesterday, they tried again. And in 3 sharp clashes south of Da Nang, they were turned back again and reportedly lost 126 men. Allied losses were said to have been light. Today, only sporadic fighting is reported in South Vietnam.
If you just met a new person and you're stuck for a way to fill in the awkward silences, offer him bugles. Bugles are love, truth, beauty, corn, and a little salt.
The Baker's Bride. Baking the baker a cake? It's the discovery dessert from Betty Crocker. Good enough to make a baker jealous. The first and only fluffy chocolate frosting and a yellow cake mix that blends perfectly with eggs for richly moist flavor. Betty Crocker yellow cake and fluffy chocolate frosting. Good enough to make a baker jealous. When the flavor's this exciting, you can bet it's Betty Crocker.
The foreign minister of the Netherlands said today that according to NATO intelligence, Soviet troops are concentrating in Bessarabia on the Romanian border and in communist Hungary, too. He wouldn't speculate on whether the troops might invade Romania, but Czechoslovaks recall how Soviet troops were concentrated on their borders just before the invasion. The people of Czechoslovakia got a further taste today of what life will be like under the Russians. Freedom of the press began to die. The last underground radio stations went off the air. The Prime Minister warned that the occupying Russians have drawn up a list of some 2,000 intellectuals who may be arrested. And there's a report that the Central Committee of the Czechoslovak Communist Party will meet tomorrow to elect a new presidium, one that would be acceptable to Moscow. The Czechoslovaks are resisting moves like these, but as Peter Kalischer and Morley Safer report, the resistance now is very muted.
Information bulletins, resolutions, the signing of petitions. This is now Czechoslovak resistance to the implacable fact that the Russians are here and intend to stay. And everybody knows that indignation never stopped a tank. The people are pinning their hopes on their leaders because they have absolutely nowhere else to go. Although some speak desperately of China, help from China, they all know that as in 1938, and in 1948, the rest of the world will not, perhaps cannot, lift a finger to save them. Where do you think you're going to get your help now?
No, that I'm not sure, because I'm afraid we can't get any help from any other country than from our own country.
You know, I think the world now treats this as an internal matter, since your government is back, and there's very little they can do. Do you realize that?
Yes, I do. But I think that many declarations and that boycott of Soviet Union can help us. And we have one card, just maybe that China can help us.
Somebody has suggested that maybe you could get help from China. Do you believe that?
Of course I don't believe that. It's just a speculation. I don't believe that. It's impossible. They don't care about us so much. They are more concerned now with their internal affairs. And what about country in the Central Europe having 40 million inhabitants? Too far from them. They are not so interested in our country.
Just screening these films in New York has made the change in mood evident to us these past few days. The change from open defiance to passive resistance to something like despair. These emotions are reflected elsewhere in Czechoslovakia. Morley Safer reports from Pilsen.
This is the Pittsburgh of Czechoslovakia and the Milwaukee. It's the steel and beer capital of the country. It's a tough town that doesn't take too kindly to strangers, and especially not to an occupying army. Pilsen's biggest employer is the giant Skoda plant. The Skoda management are privately bitter, openly courageous in the face of the occupying Russians. They threw out a couple of officers who demanded to speak to the men. But to visiting newsmen, they plead for calm and restraint. Do you think that the men here are going to fight?
Can fight? I didn't catch what you said.
Will they fight? Will they fight the occupation army?
Against the occupation army? Jestli se u nás bojovat proti okupační armádě. Tady v průmyslové město.
Tak můžeme říci, že jsme si všichni uvědomili vážnost situace a zjistili jsme, že jakýkoliv odpor by byl zbytečný a nesmyslný.
We can say to you that we all realized that the situation was very serious and that any resistance and any with force would be of no use. Therefore, no fight.
The people of Pilsen do not hold back. They gather in the town square where a huge public display of anti-Soviet art and slogans is on permanent view. Grim faces, independent. Furious with the heavy hand of Soviet Russia. They are communists, but want no truck with Russia's grand design.
We don't like our occupation of Russia. Before there has been our brothers, frère. But now it's our enemy.
What does this poster say? We know what it looks like.
It's Moscow talking. Moscow speaking on the telephone.
And this one down here?
It's probably who is going to win. Whether the dove of peace or the fighting planes behind it.
Most people in Pilsen recall their last occupation. That was in the summer of 1945 by soldiers of General Patton's 3rd U.S. Army. And the sign says, the United States gave Pilsen freedom. The Soviet Union took it away. It's not very likely that U.S. troops will ever again occupy this part of Western Bohemia. And unhappily for the Czechs, it's very likely that Soviet troops will be here a lot longer than the 7 months that General Patton stayed. Morley Safer, CBS News, in Pilsen.
New Silver Thins 100s, the impossible cigarette. A 100-millimeter cigarette with reduced tar and nicotine, yet better taste. Impossible. Try new Silver Thins 100s. Latest U.S. government figures show Silver Thins lowest in tar and nicotine of all 100s tested. Lower than most Kings. Can a cigarette that tastes as good as Silver Thins actually be that low in tar and nicotine? Read the United States government figures. Try Silver Thins today.
The Justice Department admitted today that it tapped the phones of former heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali 5 times in 1964 and 65. But it said Ali was not the main object of the eavesdropping. Rather, the Justice Department said the phones were bugged to gather what it called foreign intelligence information. For the past 3 years, labor organizer Cesar Chavez has led protest marches, rallies, and strikes to gain union recognition for the grape pickers of Central California. This year, he's trying a new tactic, one that could have a nationwide effect. Terry Drinkwater reports.
This is the peak of the harvest season in the vineyards of California's San Joaquin Valley. It is also the showdown between organized labor and the growers, the make or break point of the national boycott against California table grapes. All across the country, from New York to San Francisco, the AFL-CIO is putting pressure on supermarkets not to sell grapes and on housewives not to buy them. The reason?
None of the grape pickers or packers in this large vineyard are members of any unions at all. And the fact is that not a single producer of California table grapes in the whole state has signed any contract with a single union.
5 years of intensive organizing efforts in the field have not worked. Migrant farm workers are hard to organize because they move around so much, because agriculture is basically unstable, and because the growers have offered such hard resistance to the union. The boycott is being planned and directed by Cesar Chavez and his United Farm Workers. He calls it his ultimate weapon.
See, one of the great faiths that we have is that the American public will not stand for any injustices once they know. They're beginning to find out, and they're beginning to find out that we're not asking for government subsidies. We're not asking for handouts. We're asking for a legitimate wage and a legitimate way of doing it non-violently. So the boycott is the best all-around weapon that we have. Not only is it the best economic weapon, but also it's a very good non-violent weapon.
Picket lines have been put around supermarkets in 23 major cities, and the boycott has received wide political support. Presidential nominee Hubert Humphrey has endorsed it, and so have mayors of New York, Detroit, St. Louis, and other cities. Chavez went to Boston to dramatize what he says is the cause of the nearly 30,000 grape pickers in California. Like the dumping of the tea, which helped to start the American Revolution, he said, dumping of the grapes here is a symbol of the start of a union revolution in agriculture. However, despite Chavez's efforts, most supermarkets in the country still stock grapes. But a significant number of shoppers, mostly wives of other union members, are not buying the grapes. They are observing the boycott. The Jumeirah Company of Delano is the biggest producer of table grapes in California.
I think the most relevant consideration to all of your viewers, to the people across the country, is should labor unions have the power or the right or the ability to curtail the flow of any food from the fields of California or any other state to their food stores? It seems to me that the farmers are growing good crops. They're paying high wages here in the state of California, the highest in the United States, with fine working conditions for the workers. The workers are not on strike, and it should be up to the consumer whether or not the consumer wants to boycott a product by not buying. But no one should have the power to stop the flow of foods, because if it's grapes today, it could be lettuce or tomatoes or any other commodity, and there will be constant boycotts of other commodities as the union attempts to organize other areas. The consumer has a tremendous interest, and I think they should support the farm worker and support the farmer. And the farm workers are in that field, in that ranch. They're working. They're not on strike.
We're estimating here that in another 10 days or so, we'll be having about 500 different cities and towns boycotting. And the success of the boycott is not so much what we can do with our staff, but what people take upon themselves to do.
Chavez says that 20% fewer grapes have been sold this year than last. The growers say it's more like 10%. Even 10% hurts, but so far not enough so that the growers have agreed to sit down and begin negotiations with the union. As more and more grapes ripen, the showdown will come in the next few weeks. Union men look upon California as the General Motors of agriculture. The success or failure of the grape boycott may well set the pattern for labor's tactics in organizing farm workers all across the country. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Delano, California.
Doctors at Walter Reed Army Medical Center said today that former President Eisenhower's recovery continues to show a favorable trend. They said he's now allowed to sit up and read in bed, and he's in excellent spirits, though his condition remains serious. William Tallman, who played the district attorney on the Perry Mason television series, died today in Encino, California, at the age of 53. Averages on the New York Stock Exchange closed up today on a volume of 8,200,000 shares. The exchange index gained 9 cents.
Modern civilization with acid indigestion, gas, heartburn, tense, tight stomach. The modern solution is Digel, the extra action antacid. Digel not only neutralizes excess acid, it also has the extra action of simethicone, which breaks up bubbles of gas, helps relax tense, tight stomach. Digel, the extra action antacid, tablets or liquid.
Hot sun. Hours drift away.
Ahoy there! Tide's taking you out. Climb aboard.
Fiery sunburn pain. Put out the fire. With Solar Cane. Contains pain-killing benzocaine, ingredient used by doctors. Stop sunburn pain with Solar Cane.
A 4-year-old kidnap victim, Stanley Stalford Jr., is back home with his parents tonight in Beverly Hills, California, after a dramatic rescue by FBI agents early today. Richard Threlkeld reports.
Stanley Murray Stalford Jr. is 4 years old and the son of a millionaire banker. Wednesday, he was kidnapped from the family's expensive home in Beverly Hills. The kidnapper said he would kill the boy unless he got $250,000 ransom. Stanley's father talked to the FBI, but he also agreed to pay off. Red Tracton, a family friend, was the go-between, and early this morning, he left the money at an agreed-on drop point on a lonely road.
Kept saying, don't touch the kid, take the money and go to South America, do whatever you want, but leave the kid alone. Agreed with him to I'd give him the money. When he gave me the kid, I would drop the satchel, and it was a heavy satchel, incidentally, $250,000, and $20 bills is about the heaviest thing you'd ever carry. And I walked 4 blocks with it, but we had arranged that I would drop the satchel on this lonely road, and when I dropped, in El Segundo, somewhere, and when I dropped the satchel, he was to let the kid come to me.
But the kidnapper never got the money. FBI agents spotted the boy and the suspect in a parked car, and in a desperate gamble, chased them 3 miles through Los Angeles, trading shots with the driver before they finally stopped the fugitive car by ramming it. Young Stanley Stalford crawled out with only a scratch. The suspect, Robert Dacey of Lakewood, California, was pulled out, arrested, and hospitalized with a broken leg. FBI agents recovered the money, $250,000 in $20 bills. It was still all there. What was important, though, was that after 48 hours of waiting and despair, after an abortive payoff attempt, and after a cops and robbers chase, Stanley Stalford Sr. had his son back at last, a grateful man.
My wife and I, needless to say, are highly pleased. It would be absolutely impossible to praise to any adequate degree the fine and extremely competent work of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Beverly Hills Police Department, and to Mr. S. Tracton, who was the intermediary for us in arranging the payment of the ransom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You saved my life.
How did your wife feel?
Just wonderful. Just wonderful.
Stalford carried his dazed son from the hospital to a waiting car and to the waiting arms of the boy's mother. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Los Angeles.
This is Charles Kuralt for Walter Cronkite. Good night.
Can this exquisitely proportioned beauty survive? She's about to be tormented. Watch. 27 tons of sand and rock will crash down on our beauty. We're talking about the elegant new ballpoint pen from Bic, the refillable Click. Can the Click survive? We'll soon know. Dare we look? Yes, the sleek finish gleams. Retracting mechanism works perfectly, but will it write? Like all Bics, the new Click writes first time, every time. Its diamide ball never fails. Carry it proudly.
Pick up a beauty today. The new Bic Click. Refillable. 8 delicious colors. Very expensive. 49 cents each. You'd be silly to spend more for any pen.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, this has been the CBS Evening News with Charles Kuralt, substituting for Walter Cronkite.